USPAP, page 168. Advisory Opinion 35 continued. Most residential appraisal report forms have a field in which the appraiser must enter an opinion of the neighborhood marketing time. However, most residential appraisal report forms do not have a field for which the appraiser must report the reasonable exposure time. In these cases, the appraiser must supplement the form to comply with USPAP. Summary: the reasonable exposure time inherent in the market value concept is always presumed to precede the effective date of the appraisal. Exposure time is different for various types of property and under various market conditions. Exposure time may be a single period of time or a range. Exposure time is dependent on the characteristics of the subject property and the market conditions as of the effective date. When the client specifies a time period upon which the appraiser is to base the opinion of value, and that period differs from the appraiser's opinion of a reasonable exposure time, the final opinion of value may not be market value as typically defined. Page 169. Advisory Opinion 36, AO-36. This communication by the Appraisal Standards Board, ASB, does not establish new standards or interpret existing standards. Advisory opinions are issued to illustrate the applicability of appraisal standards in specific situations and to offer advice from the ASB for the resolution of appraisal issues and problems. Subject: identification and disclosure of client, intended use, and intended users. Application: real property, personal property, intangible property. The issue: an appraiser must identify and consider the client, any other intended users, and the intended use of the appraiser's reported opinions and conclusions in order to identify the problem to be solved and to understand his or her development and reporting responsibilities in an appraisal or appraisal review assignment. An appraiser must state the intended use and intended users of the opinions and conclusions in a report. What kind of information must an appraiser identify and consider regarding the intended use and intended users in the course of accepting and completing an assignment? And how much of that information must an appraiser include in the report? Advice from the ASB on this issue. Relevant USPAP and advisory references. The term client is defined in the definitions section of USPAP as the party or parties who engage by employment or contract an appraiser in a specific assignment. Comment: the client may be an individual, group, or entity and may engage and communicate with the appraiser directly or through an agent. The term intended use is defined as the uses of an appraiser's reported appraisal or appraisal review assignment results as identified by the appraiser based on communication with the client at the time of the assignment. The term intended user as defined as the client and any other party as identified by name or type and as users of the appraisal or appraisal review report by the appraiser based on communication with the client at the time of the assignment. Specific issue to be addressed. In order to properly define the problem and to understand his or her responsibilities in an assignment, an appraiser must identify the client and any other intended users. This is accomplished by communication with the client at the time of the engagement. An appraiser should use care when identifying the client to avoid violations of the confidentiality section of the ethics rule. In instances where the client wishes to remain anonymous, the appraiser must still document the identity of the client in the work file, but may omit the client's identity in the appraisal or appraisal review reports. The client may be identified as a person or entity or as an agent of the intended user. When the identity of the client is withheld from the report must state that the client's identity has been withheld at the client's request. The appraiser is not obligated to identify additional intended users by name. If identification by name is not appropriate or practical, the appraiser may identify an intended user by type. An appraiser's obligations to the client are established in the course of considering and accepting an engagement. If during the assignment an appraiser becomes aware of a change in the intended use, the appraiser must consider whether the extent of the development process and report content initially planned are still appropriate. If they are not, the appraiser must make the necessary changes. An appraiser's obligations to other intended users may impose additional development and reporting requirements.